afternoon. It's Thursday, February 11th. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife Sarah rejected a court ruling that granted Menny Naftali, the former house manager at the Prime Minister's residence, 170,000 shekels compensation. The Jerusalem Labor Court found that the workers at the Prime Minister's residence were exposed to intolerable working conditions. A statement issued by the Netanyahu family today said the picture that emerged in the court ruling is far from reality, adding that it is unfortunate that judges devoted a large portion of their decision to the First Lady, who was not even party to the trial. The court described Sarah Netanyahu's attitudes towards employees as insulting and humiliating, and said her claims of Naftali's improper behavior were not backed by a shred of evidence. In the ruling, the judge wrote, "It is regrettable that Mrs. Netanyahu chose to severely slander former employees of the Prime Minister's residence without these claims being backed by the minimal amount of evidence presented to us." Shortly after the ruling, Naftali, who worked at the residence between 2011 and 2012, said the court's decision proved he was right all along. Now turning to our neighbor in the north, Syria, where the civil war is approaching its 5th anniversary and shows signs of escalation as Assad's forces bear down on Aleppo. The conflict has left the country reeling in death and destruction. Today in Munich, world powers are expected to convene in an effort to secure a ceasefire agreement. IBA's Margaret Dudkevich reports.
The years of conflict have taken its toll, with Syria's national wealth, institutions and infrastructure almost totally obliterated. The death toll is approaching 500,000 and continues to climb. Just days ago, Turkey's Prime Minister accused Russia, who unleashed its air force against Western-backed militia fighters, of ethnic cleansing. He says its airstrikes are forcing those who don't support the Syrian regime to be driven out of the country towards Turkey's borders. World powers are set to convene in Munich this evening, with the aim of reaching a ceasefire that will allow a humanitarian aid into the war-torn country.
Well, there's no question, and I've said this before publicly, that Russia's activities in Aleppo and in the region right now are making it much more difficult to be able to come to the table and to be able to have a serious conversation. And we have called on Russia, and we call on Russia again, to join in the effort to bring about an immediate ceasefire and to bring about full humanitarian access. That is what this meeting will be about, and this meeting will tell a lot about the road ahead.
But a new report released by the Syrian Center for Policy Research reveals some somber facts. 11.5% of the country's population has been killed or injured since the conflict erupted in March 2010. The number of wounded has reached 1.9 million, and life expectancy has dropped to an average age of just 55. Syrian opposition groups are demanding urgent action to relieve the suffering of tens of thousands of civilians caught in Syria's largest city, Aleppo, which is in danger of being cut off by Assad's army, aided by Russian airstrikes and Hezbollah and Iranian forces. The city has been divided between government and rebel control for years. Turkey has warned that as many as 1 million refugees could reach its borders if the Russian-Syrian campaign continues. The daily death toll in Syria continues to rise and the world remains silent. UN-brokered peace talks are scheduled to resume in Geneva in 2 weeks' time, but only the optimists believe they will bring an end to the bloodshed and violence. Margaret Dudkevich, IBA News.
Indictments have been filed against the two 13-year-old Israeli Arab girls who stabbed a security guard at the entrance to a mall in Ramleh city center last week. The charges were filed by the Central District Attorney at Lod's Juvenile Court this morning. The two are accused of attempted murder, conspiracy to commit a crime, and possessing knives. According to the police, the two girls, residents of the city's Jarish neighborhood, planned the attack with the aim of becoming martyrs and had initially hoped to stab soldiers. But when they failed to spot any, they stabbed a guard, shouting, "Allahu Akbar, God is great." The security guard was lightly injured in the leg and the hand. New surveillance footage shows that the stabbing attack on 28-year-old Tomer Ditour as he jogged near the Gush Etzion community of Neve Daniel on Tuesday. Ditour is seen jogging along a dirt road when a man hiding in the bushes springs out and stabs him repeatedly and then flees after a scuffle. After the attack, the injured detour managed to make his way to the entrance to Neve Daniel, where he alerted security forces. A manhunt for the assailant continues, with the IDF forces searching the nearby Palestinian village of Nahalin. Jamal Harkouch is set to become the country's first Muslim Arab appointed to the rank of Deputy Commissioner of Police. Harkouch is from the Galilee village of Kfar Kana and currently serves as the Deputy Chief Officer in the Coastal Police District. He will command a new division that will focus on fighting the disproportionate amount of crime in the Israeli Arab sector. Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan and Police Chief Ronnie El-Sheikh have both approved the appointment, which requires the final authorization of the Finance Ministry and the Prime Minister's office. Well, joining me now in the studio to shed some light on the top news stories of the week is Amotz Asael, a senior columnist for the Jerusalem Post and the Dow Jones Market Watch. Amotz, thanks for joining us.
How are you?
Well, let's start off with the New York Times opinion maker, Thomas Friedman, and he wrote a recent op-ed. And he says that he declares the peace process is dead. He says there will be no two-state solution. Let the one-state era begin. And then Zionist Union leader Isaac Herzog this week in the Knesset said that a two-state solution is impossible. So is that the nail in the coffin of a two-state solution? Where are we headed?
I think these are both assessments. Isaac Herzog particularly said he does not expect it imminently, and he, as a result of this assessment of his, emerged with his set of proposals for what to do in the interim that was approved by the Labour Party, and Tom Friedman also joins this assessment. And it's everybody's sober assessment in the aftermath of recent years' Palestinian refusal and Israeli, I would say, lack of enthusiasm for trying to make the Palestinians come forth with some kind of a practical plan with which to implement Netanyahu's own stated vision of establishing a Palestinian state alongside Israel. This is the assessment that everyone seems to be sharing. What to do in its wake is a separate question. I think that as Netanyahu sees things, the demographic balance that people were threatening Israel with in recent decades has changed in the aftermath of Israel's retreat from Gaza. Israel has subtracted from the equation 1.5 at least million Palestinians who reside in Gaza. This is one thing, and the way he sees it, also the demographic dynamics of birth rates in Israel, in the West Bank, and among Israeli Arabs are such that the share of Jews within this broad Israel on both sides of the Green Line is, in his assessment, one that Israel can live with.
So if the two-state solution is dead and we're going to have a one-state solution, what are the paradigms of a one-state solution that don't involve a binational state?
I think that, first of all, there can be some kind, politically speaking, there can be, and there effectively is, a kind of nascent confederation system whereby the Palestinians in the West Bank have their own system revolving around an elected parliament. Never mind that its election is overdue, but the mechanism has been set in motion. And in the future, it can be managed in a way that will actually lay the foundations for a functioning and even growing economy that will live alongside Israel's. So that is on the political system, on the political plane. Socially speaking, the societies are roughly living alongside each other on parallel planes.
But will the violence continue?
With some overlap locations, particularly Jerusalem, that certainly awaits a future arrangement.
But what about the violence? Will that continue, the uprising?
It comes and goes, and once again, we're only trying here to interpret the Israeli government and the way it sees things. This is, of course, regrettable and deserves to be confronted, but it's the lesser of two evils because as far as it is concerned, if Israel withdraws under whatever circumstances from the West Bank, it will be used only in order to stage other attacks on Israel that will be even more lethal.
Amos, let's move on to something that's a potentially dramatic diplomatic incident. Yesterday, Shas Knesset member Yaakov Margi, he's the chairman of the Education Committee, went to Crimea and he met with the president, which is nothing more than a puppet president of Putin. What was he thinking? I mean, is Israel taking a side here in the Crimea?
This is really bizarre. He, first of all, is a very insular lawmaker. He deals with Shas issues. He deals with Shas's electorate. That's not what you find in Ukraine. Jews who live there, and actually there's a sizable Jewish community in Ukraine, if and when they arrive here, they don't end up voting for Shas. He doesn't have a political interest in that electorate. And in terms of his horizons, he has all his life lived here, does not have, unlike other lawmakers, much of a biographical chapter outside of Israel.
So what's the big picture?
Officially speaking, he was invited by the rabbi of the town of Sevastopol and simply came there as a private person in order to check out the Jewish community. I hope everyone takes this explanation at face value because diplomatically speaking, Israel has had a very unique position towards the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Unlike the rest of the West, Israel has been neutral and been very careful to make it plain that it has no dog in that fight. And it was, in my view, and everybody's view, in fact, government and opposition, it was the right policy. Israel has plenty on the plate with Russia that it does not want to risk. Relations with Russia have really flourished in recent years and are a happy aftermath of the very bad relationship that Israel had with the Russians during the Soviet era, and no one wants to ruin that. At the same time, in Ukraine, there is a sizable Jewish community. No one wants to hurt that either. I hope this does not disturb this balance.
Well, finally, let's have a look at the Syria, what's going on there. It looks like Assad's forces, which are backed by the Russians, by Hezbollah, by Iran, have closed off the rebels' access to Aleppo. They're making gains. We're approaching 5 years of this uprising. What are the ramifications for Israel?
I think that the first given is that the way things currently seem, Assad and his cause have survived. The worst, from their viewpoint, is behind them. They're on their feet. They've rallied their allies. They've proven that their allies, namely the Russians and the Iranians, are much more reliable than Western powers have been for their adversaries. And therefore they survive and now are also beginning to have the upper hand on the battlefield. Having said this, I don't see Assad restoring his grip on the entire previous state of Syria. What he's restoring his grip on with the Russians' blunt and very visible help is Western Syria with the entire coast and large chunks of the Syrian-Turkish border. He does not restore his grip on the hinterland, which is predominantly Sunni. And the way things have happened over the past half decade, with the numbers that we've heard today of 500,000 fatalities, I don't see him restoring his leadership over the Sunni majority. So Syria will remain fractured for the foreseeable future, and Israel, for its part, needs to continue following this closely and staying away from it.
It's not really a threat anymore, is it?
Well, the Syrian army is busy with what it is busy with and also severely bruised, but I would never count out anyone who's that close to us and that well equipped and sadly also remains as highly motivated as it always was.
Well, Motzasel, always a pleasure to hear your insight. Thanks for joining IBA News.
Thank you, Ari.
On Kibbutz Daphna in the Galilee, a memorial ceremony was held last night marking the 19th anniversary of the helicopter crash. 73 officers and soldiers were killed when two CH-53 helicopters ferrying them to Lebanon collided in midair. IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Gadi Eisenkot spoke at the ceremony, but for the first time there was no representative from the government at the memorial. Parents said they were angry. They weren't angry, they were only saddened by this. Good news for all the new and old immigrants in Israel. Legislation marking the 10th of the Hebrew month of Nisan as Aliyah Day, aimed at saluting immigrants to Israel and their contribution to the state, passed its preliminary reading in the Knesset. Once finalized, the day will be celebrated in the country's schools, in the army, the president's residence, as well as a special cabinet meeting and a session in the Knesset. Israeli lawmakers said the bill will also serve to increase the appreciation for the sacrifices immigrants made in order to fulfill the Zionist dream. Members of the Foreign Press Association were invited this week to the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee to discuss their coverage of the recent terror wave. Angered by the invitation, the journalists at first declined, but later decided to participate. The reporters received a questionnaire regarding so-called biased coverage by some of the media outlets and were asked to present their input on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Subcommittee head, Knesset member Tzipi Livni, stressed the discussion was not intended to bash the foreign press, but rather to hear about the data collected and to see how Israel and the foreign ministry are handling the issue. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan hosted a delegation of American Jewish leaders earlier this week in what has been described as a rare meeting. The delegation was led by Malcolm Hoenlein, the chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major Jewish Organizations, who was in our studios last week. The meeting in Ankara marked the first time Erdogan met with American Jewish leaders since his confrontation with former President Shimon Peres in Davos in 2009. Hoenlein, who was a close confidant of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, was reportedly asked to convey a message of reconciliation between Israel and Turkey. Iran will unveil an upgrade of its Imad ballistic missile in March, the country's defense minister announced yesterday. Both the U.S. and UN have criticized the Islamic Republic for advancing its missile program. Defense Minister Hussein Dehagan declared the Imad missile is not a violation of the nuclear deal or any UN resolution. He also noted that Iran will start taking delivery of the advanced Russian S-300 surface-to-air missile defense system in the near future. A 94-year-old former guard at the Auschwitz death camp went on trial today in West Germany, in the West German town of Detmold. Reinhold Heining is accused of being an accessory to the murder of at least 170,000 people. Heining was 20 years old when he began serving as a security guard at the death camp. The prosecutor will be joined by some 338 plaintiffs from Hungary, Israel, Canada, Great Britain, and the United States, who will testify before the court. Nazi hunter Efraim Zuroff, responsible for war crimes investigations at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, said aid should not be viewed as an obstacle to prosecution. In local money matters, another day of losses on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, while the shekel was mixed in foreign currency trading. Here are the late afternoon numbers. Looking at the weather, and it will remain a little cloudy, but the forecast is for warmer temperatures over the weekend. Good time to go out and see the blooming wildflowers. Here are the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That brings us to the end of this broadcast of IBA News. I'll be back on Sunday for another daily edition. We'll leave you with the color of flowers being picked in the country's nurseries to sell in the markets on Valentine's Day. Until then, have a good evening, a great weekend, and shalom from Jerusalem.